Today's guest, Brigadier General Harold W. Nelson, former Chief of Military History for the U.S. Army, into the Civil War time machine on Civil War Talk Radio.
Have you let your website go stale?
Wish you didn't have to wait for your web developer to return your call when you want to update content?
You don't have to.
Now you can easily and instantly manage your own website content using affordable Avalar technology.
Avalar is a website development and hosting company that provides turnkey internet solutions for companies like yours that need to stay focused on core business.
Avalar gives you the power to control your website and make updates and additions in real time without having to learn HTML or other complicated programming tools.
Websites powered by Avalar feature capabilities that attract more customers and enhance relationships with existing customers.
Avalar offers a multitude of leading-edge solutions, including lead generation and referral tracking, shopping carts and payment processing, membership management, and search engine optimization, to name a few.
Take advantage of the full power of the Internet using Avalar technology at www.avalar.com.
That's AVALAR.com.
So, you're trying to lose those jiggles? I know one thing that can block your progress. Fat buildup in the liver. How do I know? I am a liver. It's my job to regulate fat metabolism because I am a major fat-burning organ in the body. But with all that fat in your diet, I can become clogged. Too much fat clogging and I can lose my fat-burning abilities. Sometimes I even store fat when I should be burning it. That's why Livotropics was developed as an all-natural lipotropic formula that assists me in burning fat. Check it out for yourself in the dictionary. Lipotropic is defined as a substance that reduces excessive fat from the liver. Livotropics is the lipotropic formula made for me, the liver. Once you begin taking Livotropics, it'll rev up my fat-burning engine, increasing fat metabolism. Livotropics will assist me in burning fat and help you shed those extra pounds. And it's 100% soy-based all-natural lipotropic formula. So help unclog me, the liver, with Livotropics.
Go to naturalfatburning.com to experience Livotropics for yourself. Help your liver burn fat faster at naturalfatburning.com.
You're listening to World Talk Radio, where the world comes to talk.
To reach a show host or guest during the live show, dial toll-free in North America 866-613-1612. Or if outside the USA and Canada, dial 001-858-268-3068.
Welcome back to Civil War Talk Radio. I'm Jerry Prokopovich, talking today with Hal Nelson, former Chief of Military History for the U.S. Army. During the break, I don't know if the commercials that I hear as we record this are the same that are put into the archived version. Listeners, maybe you heard something different. But I was hearing ones about losing weight through some liver control product for the first time. And I would just like to point out to our listeners that Civil War Talk Radio does actually apparently make commercials available. If you have a Civil War-related product, send us an email and we'll work something out. But in the meantime, the commercial slots are filled by things I have no knowledge or control over, and I'm fascinated to hear them. Perhaps they're aware that most of us who enjoy reading about the Civil War are in our mid-40s or later, little overweight, bearded white males. So maybe the liver weight loss is just what we need. I don't know. Anyway, back to our conversation today. In our last segment, we were talking about the idea of touring battlefields. Hal, you, as we pointed out, wrote the wonderful War College guides to the battlefield at Gettysburg, at Antietam, at Chancellorsville, Fredericksburg, and so on. And I raised the point that some people think using battlefield tours for civilian business leaders as a way of teaching them to be better business leaders is not appropriate somehow. And I thought you made a very articulate defense of that. And I'd just like to throw in another 2 cents worth on the subject before we move on again, which is that there are a lot of ways to look at the Civil War, to look at the past, that people from the outside might regard as frivolous or inappropriate. Certainly those who reenact, who put on the uniforms of the 1860s and reenact the battles, could be accused of playing soldier, Those who literally play with soldiers, with toy soldiers, and reenact the battles on a tabletop could be accused of the same thing. Those who play computer games of the battles. And even those who read, what are we doing if not vicariously experiencing that era through the printed page? So I'm not, I would say I share your view that there's nothing inherently wrong in taking a group of business leaders out to a battlefield to discuss leadership lessons, especially because, as you pointed out, after 2 or 3 days of this, they may have come out thinking, oh, what's this junket all about? But they come back, many of them, touched by what they've learned.
Well, and in addition, we give them suggested readings in the course of getting them ready. They may read only a tiny bit, but I might encounter one of those people a year or two later, and they have become people who read about military history in general, the Civil War in particular, not necessarily battle history, but maybe biographies of key Civil War leaders. And they've probably, if they've done that, then they've probably found an excuse or a reason to bring family members to a battlefield. And at Gettysburg, they then hire the licensed guide and have a wonderful experience that's very mainstream and usually acceptable to the critics who can't quite see why they would have come there in the first place as a business leader. So the other part of it is that what we do with our staff rides is not that strange or foreign, and we don't make people read lots of business books before they come to Gettysburg. We just encourage them to read some military history. Now, they may have back in their off-site facility at Gettysburg or somewhere, they may have a seminar on some business book, but I've never known that to be a feature that's carried out onto the battlefield. There's a great deal of respect for the soldier, and I would also add that if you line them up in a column of twos and make them form line from column, it's an unforgettable experience for people who have never acted or enacted in a battle environment. So it's not that much different than any other tour of a battlefield.
No, or for that matter, a classroom experience. I do the same in terms of lining up the students.
Right.
In a column of twos or teaching the wheel left, and it opens their eyes. Yeah,
it's hard. It's harder than you'd think it is.
Last year I had a student who raised his hand and said, well, he was a former captain in a horse cavalry unit, a ceremonial unit.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to tell me and the rest of the class things about cavalry drill that I didn't know.
Right.
And the horse behavior. And I thought that was fascinating, that sometimes you're teaching someone and you end up learning more than
right. And you see, when we're out on a battlefield, if there is a reenactment group or a reenactment instruction site, we'd almost always go out of our way physically and with our timetable in order to get a little opportunity to learn from those people, because any of the interpretive historian, reenactor, whatever term you like best, who is allowed to apply his hobby on a Civil War battlefield has been checked out by the state or National Park Service that runs the battlefield, and they're very good teachers. They know a lot of things that people who haven't soldiered in the 19th century and don't engage in that passion cannot share in the same way that they can share it.
Now, a question I like to ask people on the show is this idea of time travel. If you had the opportunity to go back to the Civil War era for 1 hour and talk with anyone you wanted to for that time and then be transported safely back to the present, who would you most want to visit with?
Oh, I would very much want to visit with Ulysses Grant. I think he's fascinating. He was so underappreciated before the war began and had few champions in the early part of the war. and yet transcended that underdog status, if you will, and I think was a superb leader with America's Army, with the kind of soldiers and with the kind of democracy he was called upon to defend. So I'd like to find Grant, and I don't know which hour I would pick. That's an interesting question in itself.
That is,
because we wouldn't want to disrupt time too much. So I suppose it probably would be. As we are trying to cross over the James and telling him he really ought to get out on the other side of the bridge and push a little harder down there might be some big payoffs.
That's right. You could go back and contribute your own knowledge. That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, so, that's one of the old time travel questions. Well, so, now what are you going to do? You're back there.
Yeah, how much?
You don't have any right to change things. But at any rate, for me, it's Grant. I find Sherman very attractive, too. Of course, I've been living with Sherman a lot while we've been cleaning up this Atlanta book. And a remarkable man. But not as, he just doesn't have the poise, the steadiness of Grant. And I think I might worry that I'd catch Sherman at the wrong hour.
I suppose you could be a fly on the wall when Grant and Sherman meet after the first night at Shiloh. That's always stuck in my mind.
That's a great one. And then when they meet, as Grant is becoming, they confer as Grant is becoming the commanding general on the railroad trip. I wouldn't mind going along on that train trip.
Okay.
To see them interact first, as you say, in a time of real crisis. But then in the second, when they stand on the threshold of decisive strategic victory. In either moment, I think being a fly on the wall would be a remarkable learning experience.
Now, you made an interesting point about Grant being the right leader for the kind of army that he led. And the Civil War was, of course, a war of volunteers.
Yes.
The draft was eventually instituted on both sides, but
right, but it's basically still one in which these are citizen soldiers.
Now, in contrast, you served during the draftee era, the 1960s, and on into the all-volunteer army.
Right.
And how, given that you've seen those two different sides of the coin, how does that make you reflect on what the Civil War army looked like?
Well, I think it probably did look a lot more like the good draftee army before things got very shaky in the Vietnam era. I believe that some of the officers may have been as shaky as some of the officers as we got well into the Vietnam War, but I don't think they had the discipline and authority problems that some had in the late 60s. So I would compare the Union Army very much to the draftee army, say, of 63, 64 when I was commissioned, where most soldiers gave the officer the benefit of a doubt, and if he could prove that he was technically and tactically qualified and reasonably thoughtful about their well-being, the officer then established and maintained authority. And where the non-commissioned officers truly understood the needs of the soldier and the needs of the unit and were great first-line supervisors. I think probably the difference would be in that latter category. I don't think the Union armies really had enough time to develop the non-commissioned officer corps in a way that I benefited from as a junior officer in the 60s. But that would be the big difference, the big weakness of those Civil War armies, the lack of highly qualified non-commissioned officers.
So in a technical sense, they didn't know what they were doing. One thing that always struck me about the Civil War armies was how widely they were drawn from all ranks of society.
Yes.
Certainly in the Union side, and even to a large extent on the Confederate side, excluding the enslaved population.
Yes.
But among all the free people on both sides, you had a wide participation at every level.
Indeed.
And that certainly contrasts with
today, but it doesn't contrast with that draftee army of the early 60s, you see, because Lots of kids went to ROTC, and the Harvard graduate, just like the technical school graduate, went to ROTC and came in the Army because it was a thing to do, and you did avoid the draft by serving, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a great melting pot, that old Army, and it's not that at all anymore, of course.
No.
We've made a social choice, and it's a good social choice that matches the needs of our time. I'm not criticizing that, but you asked a very good question.
Well, when you raise the point about Grant knowing his Army, it strikes me there are many different ways to raise an Army, and having leadership that's appropriate is critical.
That's right.
Unfortunately, I hear the theme music once again all too soon, which suggests we're at the end of our time. But, Hal, it is always a pleasure to talk to you.
And you, Jerry.
I hope we can walk the battlefield at Gettysburg or Antietam or somewhere in the near future. I'd like to do that again.
I would, too.
And listeners, if you haven't gotten a copy of the U.S. Army War College Guide series to Gettysburg, to Antietam, to some of the Western battles, you're missing a rare opportunity. Even if you can't get to the battlefield, the guides are well worth the price, and I recommend them to you all. So, Hal, thanks again, and listeners, thank you for listening to Civil War Talk Radio.